The shelves in a small-town store rattled with laughter the day a man's card was declined. But what no one realized was that the humiliation they mocked would ignite a story far larger than anyone in that checkout line could see. A child's simple act of kindness turned into a spark that exposed hidden wounds, drew out enemies who preferred him broken, and forced a community to decide whether they would believe gossip or stand for truth. What unfolded wasn't about wealth or headlines, but about dignity, second chances, and the quiet power of staying when running seemed easier. Stay with this story, leave a like, subscribe so you don't miss the twists ahead, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from and how you think it will all end. Michael Grant had always been a man who lived in a world where doors opened at his presence and transactions cleared before the card ever touched the machine. But in Dawsonville, a quiet mountain town, he had chosen for anonymity. That illusion cracked in front of a small audience at the grocery store. He wore jeans, a faded shirt, and a baseball cap that hid the sharpness of his once familiar face, hoping he could move through the aisles like anyone else. He picked up bread, milk, cereal, and a small bag of apples, the sort of items he had not chosen for himself in years, thinking the act of shopping might remind him of simpler times. But when the cashier, a young woman with tattoos fading along her arm, swiped his debit card and the word declined flashed in bright red on the register, the air shifted. She looked uneasy and said politely, "Maybe try again, sir," while already sensing the tension of the people waiting in line. Michael, his pulse hammering, slid the card again, certain it was some error. Declined. This time the silence broke into cruel mutters. A man 2 customers back, wearing a construction jacket streaked with paint, snorted. "Guy's got boots worth more than my truck and can't even pay for cereal." A woman behind him chuckled, shaking her head. "Bet he's one of those internet types filming himself, pretending to be broke." Pathetic. Their voices carried easily in the cramped checkout lane, and Michael felt the humiliation sink deeper. A teenager holding an energy drink laughed, just loud enough. "Looks like a Wall Street vampire. Guess the Wi-Fi died on his crypto wallet." The laughter was not loud, but it was cutting, because it assumed everything about him while caring for nothing true. Michael stared at the screen, his throat tight, pride screaming at him to explain, to flash his ID, to reveal the name that once commanded boardrooms and made headlines. But explanation would sound like begging, and pride kept him still. Then came a voice soft but clear, startling in its innocence. "You can take my money, mister." The line stilled. Michael turned and looked down. A boy, maybe 7 or 8, stood no taller than his hip. His sneakers were worn, his hair tousled, and in his hands he clutched a crumpled envelope, coins rattling inside. He held it out as though offering treasure. A few people gasped, others chuckled in disbelief. "Lord have mercy," someone muttered. "Now a kid's paying for Mr. Armani." But Michael saw no joke in the boy's wide brown eyes. "I can't take that," Michael said quietly, shaking his head, shaken more than he expected. "That's yours. You need to keep it." The boy's voice rose with simple certainty. "But you need it now. My mom says if someone is standing alone, you stand next to them. That's what good people do." The words landed heavier than all the jeers combined. For a moment, the mocking laughter dissolved, replaced by an uncomfortable silence. An old man at the end of the line broke it with a dry scoff. "Kid's got more class than he does." Michael forced a faint smile, but his eyes burned. He crouched so he was level with the boy. "What's your name?" "Ethan," the boy answered, beaming as though he had just completed the simplest task. "Well, Ethan," Michael said gently, "that's the kindest thing anyone's done for me in a very long time." Behind them, the teenager scoffed again, trying to regain the laughter. "Bet he's got 5 Lamborghinis and not a single working debit card." Ethan frowned, his young voice firm. "You shouldn't laugh at people when they're down. That's not brave." The chuckles that had rippled earlier evaporated into silence again, uneasy this time, the boy's honesty cutting sharper than any insult. From across the store, a voice called out, strained with fatigue. "Ethan, where did you run off to?" A woman in worn blue scrubs hurried over, her tired eyes widening at the sight of her son with a stranger. "I hope he's not causing you any trouble, sir." Michael stood and shook his head quickly. "No trouble at all. In fact, he just saved me from a whole lot of shame." The mother, Claire, looked from her son to Michael, cautious but curious. "What did you do, Ethan?" "I gave him my emergency money," Ethan said proudly. "His card didn't work, and no one else helped him, so I did." Claire sighed, then turned her gaze back to Michael, wary but softening. The cashier shifted uncomfortably, clearly unsure what to do next. "Sir, do you want me to cancel the order?" Michael exhaled, the weight of humiliation pressing heavy. But Ethan's words anchored him. He could walk away, let pride drag him out the door, but he felt an invisible tether holding him in place. "No," he said softly. "Leave it for now." Claire placed a hand on her son's shoulder. "Come on, Ethan, we need to go." They began to move, but Michael found himself speaking again. "Wait," he said, and when they turned back, he felt more vulnerable than he had in years. "Would it be all right if I thanked you both properly? Maybe buy you lunch?" Claire hesitated, suspicion flickering, but she didn't dismiss him outright. "There's a diner down the street. Mavis's. Cheap but good." Michael nodded. Mavis's diner, then. As they walked away, the card reader still flashed its damning verdict. Declined. The people in line whispered among themselves, their judgment not as sharp now, replaced by curiosity, confusion, maybe even shame. Michael picked up his groceries and left the store empty-handed, but he carried something heavier than bread or apples. It was a simple place, the kind of diner with red vinyl booths, chrome edges dulled by years, and a bell above the door that announced every arrival. Michael stepped inside, feeling eyes follow him, though no one here recognized him as the once-touted mogul. He spotted Claire and Ethan in a corner booth, the boy swinging his legs against the seat, a glass of water in front of him. His mother sipping coffee with the weariness of someone whose body never caught enough rest. For a moment Michael considered turning back, but Ethan spotted him and waved enthusiastically. "Mister, over here." Michael walked over, his shoulders heavy with self-consciousness. Claire gave him a cautious glance, the protective kind a mother reserves for strangers. "You didn't have to come," she said, not unkindly but measured. "I wanted to," Michael replied, sliding into the booth across from them. The waitress, a middle-aged woman named Mavis herself, shuffled over with a menu. "What'll it be, sugar?" Michael scanned the laminated pages, the smell of fried chicken and coffee thick in the air. "Just a black coffee for now." Claire arched an eyebrow. "You sure? Food here's good." Michael offered a small smile. "I'll get something in a bit." Ethan leaned forward, his elbows on the table, utterly unfazed by the adult tension. "Did you fix your card?" Michael chuckled softly, caught off guard by the bluntness. "Not yet, but I'll figure it out." Ethan nodded sagely. "It happens to moms sometimes too. The bank gets confused." Claire's jaw tightened slightly, as though embarrassed her son had said too much, but Michael only nodded in understanding. "It happens to everyone." They sat in silence for a moment, the clink of dishes and hum of conversation filling the air around them. Michael studied Claire more closely. Her scrubs were faded from repeated washing, her hands calloused in places that spoke of long shifts at the hospital. There was a steadiness in her gaze, though guarded, like someone who had learned long ago to expect disappointment and face it anyway. "Thank you," Michael said quietly, turning his attention back to Ethan, "for what you did back there. You reminded me of something I'd forgotten." Ethan grinned, showing a missing tooth. "That people need help sometimes." Michael's throat tightened. "Exactly that." Claire sighed, shaking her head, but her eyes softened just slightly. Ethan's father was like that, always wanting to help everyone, even when we didn't have much ourselves. Michael caught the hint of grief in her tone and asked carefully, "He's not around anymore?" Claire looked down at her coffee cup, fingers tracing the rim. "Car accident 5 years ago. On his way home from the ER. He was a nurse." Ethan's smile dimmed for a moment, but he quickly perked up, as if determined not to let sadness linger. Michael swallowed, his chest heavy. He thought of his own losses, of how ambition had cost him relationships he could never repair, of his mother's final voicemail he had ignored because of a board meeting. He said softly, "I'm sorry." Claire gave a faint nod, as though used to the phrase and what little comfort it could offer. Their food arrived, a plate of fried chicken, green beans, and mashed potatoes for Ethan, while Claire had ordered a simple sandwich. Michael surprised himself by asking for the same. He had not eaten in diners for years, his meals once curated by chefs and assistants, but as he bit into the sandwich, the warmth of it, the ordinary goodness, made him feel grounded. Ethan chattered about school, about spelling words he didn't like and playground games he loved, filling the space with the kind of unfiltered joy that only children could muster. Michael found himself laughing more than he expected, the boy's humor cutting through the heaviness that had trailed him for years. After the meal, Claire checked her watch and sighed. "I've got a shift tonight. Night shift at St. Jerome's. We should head home so Ethan can get his homework done before I leave." Michael hesitated, then asked, "Would it be all right if I walked with you?" Claire gave him a wary look, but Ethan beamed. "Yes, come to our house. It's not fancy, but it's home." Michael smiled faintly. "That sounds perfect." They walked together after paying, Claire insisting on covering her own meal, while Michael left cash on the table for his. The sun was dipping low, the Georgia sky painted in streaks of orange and pink. They made their way to a second-story apartment on Rosewood Lane, the building old but tidy. The stairs creaked under their weight, and the hallway smelled faintly of old paint and detergent. Ethan bounded ahead, unlocking the door with a key dangling from a cartoon keychain. Inside, the apartment was small but filled with signs of life. A worn couch with mismatched cushions, a dining table with only 3 chairs, a hand-drawn calendar on the wall with Ethan's school schedule and Claire's shifts scribbled in colored marker. Michael stood in the doorway, unexpectedly moved by the familiarity of it all. He had lived in places like this as a child, before money, before headlines, before he had learned to value power over people. He drove into town for breakfast at a small diner across from the auto repair shop, ordering black coffee and eggs that arrived lukewarm but edible. He was halfway through when he noticed 2 teenage boys in a corner booth staring at their phones, whispering, and then one of them said not even quietly, "Yo, isn't that the guy?" Michael froze, his fork suspended midair. He pulled out his own phone reluctantly, already dreading what he might find, and there it was, a grainy video, taken from someone in the grocery store the day before, the humiliating moment of his card being declined flashing across screens nationwide. His frozen expression, the red declined letters pulsing, and worst of all, the small boy handing him a bundle of coins like he was a stray dog needing a handout. The caption read, "When your billions don't work at checkout, #Billionaire Blues." Another version showed cartoon Monopoly money raining down while circus music played. Michael's stomach twisted. He had been famous before, not beloved, but visible in a way that brought invitations, business opportunities, and the cold respect of markets that rose and fell with his signature. But this was something different. This was ridicule at its rawest, millions laughing not at his wealth, but at his fall, laughing because seeing someone who had everything stumble made their own struggles feel lighter. He closed the browser, left cash on the table, and walked out, the Georgia heat wrapping him like a punishment. As he stepped onto the sidewalk, he heard it, a small voice cutting through the noise of his shame. "Hey, Mr. Michael." Ethan's voice was bright as he hurried across the street, his backpack bouncing against his shoulders. In his hands, he carried a book far too large for his frame, his grin as wide as yesterday's. Claire followed at a slower pace, her expression unreadable, but her eyes sharper than before. Ethan ran up, holding something out. "You left your sunglasses at our place." Michael took them gently, a faint smile breaking through. "Thank you, Ethan. You saved me again." The boy beamed. "I saw your face on my mom's phone this morning. You're famous now." Claire winced, her jaw tightening, but she didn't interrupt. Michael crouched, so he was eye level with Ethan, his voice low. "Sometimes being famous just means more people laugh when you fall." Ethan wrinkled his nose, unimpressed. "That's dumb. You didn't fall. You just had a money hiccup." Michael let out a short laugh despite himself, the word easing the sting. "A hiccup, huh?" "Yeah," Ethan said firmly, "and hiccups always go away." Michael looked up at Claire, who gave a small shrug as if to say her son was impossible to argue with. They walked together toward the school, the streets already buzzing with small-town rhythm. At the gas station, an old man filling his truck spotted Michael and called out with a grin, "Card working today?" Michael forced a polite nod. "Hope so." The man chuckled. "Check your GoFundMe, son. Internet's got jokes." Laughter followed him again, but this time it felt closer, personal, because Dawsonville was no longer just a quiet backdrop. It was becoming a stage where his humiliation lived in real time. Claire walked beside him, her voice low. "People are going to keep talking, even here. Small towns don't forget when something goes viral." Michael nodded, jaw tight. "I figured. This isn't the first time I've been the punchline." "But now you're the punchline in their backyard," she replied. "That makes it harder." They reached the school gate, where children swarmed across the playground. Ethan hugged Michael fiercely around the waist. "Don't let the laughing people make you sad," he said simply. Michael swallowed hard, managing, "I'll try." Claire gave him a half smile. "Come by for spaghetti tonight, if you're still brave." Michael found himself answering, "I'll bring garlic bread," surprising even himself with the ease of the promise. He walked back to his truck, sitting behind the wheel as the morning sun lit the town. Across the parking lot, he spotted two younger men pointing at him, one miming a credit card swipe before bursting into laughter. Michael gripped the steering wheel, a voice inside urging him to drive away, to vanish again as he had before, but Ethan's words rang in his ears. A hiccup always goes away. Instead of leaving, he drove to the local hardware store. Inside, the cashier raised his brows at the sight of him. "Didn't think you'd show your face here. You need cash, right?" Michael met his gaze evenly. "I need a shovel, 2 bags of mulch, and some paint. I'm fixing the playground behind the community center." The man blinked, surprised. "Out of the kindness of your heart." Michael's voice was steady. "No, because a little boy gave me $10 and reminded me what being human looks like." By mid-afternoon, Claire and Ethan appeared at the community center, Ethan racing ahead with his backpack bouncing. "Mr. Michael, it looks different," the boy exclaimed, running toward the freshly painted swing set. Claire followed slowly, fatigue etched into her frame after a long night shift, but her expression softened as she took in the changes. "You really did all this?" she asked. Michael wiped the sweat from his brow and nodded. "Needed fixing. Thought I'd help." Ethan clambered onto the swing, grinning. "You made it better. Can you come over for dinner tonight?" Claire started to protest, but Ethan pleaded. "Please, Mom." He helped the park. "He should see our house again. We can make spaghetti." Michael smiled faintly, sensing Claire's hesitation. "Only if it's all right with you. No pressure." Claire looked at him for a long moment, then gave a reluctant nod. "Fine, but it's just spaghetti, nothing fancy." That evening, Michael followed them back to their apartment, his chest tightening as he climbed the familiar creaking stairs. The space was unchanged, but somehow warmer this time, perhaps because he had earned his way inside through Ethan's insistence rather than his own curiosity. Ethan darted into the kitchen, announcing he would be the helper tonight, pulling out noodles and a jar of sauce. Claire shook her head, amused despite herself. "Don't let him fool you. He'll sneak away before the water even boils." Michael chuckled. "Then I'll be the backup helper." While Ethan busied himself banging pots unnecessarily, Michael noticed the details of their home more carefully this time. The mismatched cushions on the sofa, the stack of unpaid bills tucked discreetly under a cookbook, the hand-drawn pictures taped to the refrigerator, each one signed with Ethan's bold letters. It was not wealth, but it was life. Honest, unpretentious, fragile in its resilience. Over dinner, Ethan chattered endlessly about school, about a classmate who claimed his uncle was a magician, about his dislike for silent reading, about how he wanted to build rockets when he grew up. Michael listened, smiling despite himself, offering small comments until Claire finally said, "Homework first, astronaut dreams later." Ethan groaned, retreating to his room with his workbook. Claire turned to Michael, her gaze sharper. "You don't owe us anything, you know. Whatever's going on with you, this, coming here, helping, it doesn't have to be out of guilt." Michael met her eyes, steady. "It's not guilt, it's gratitude." She frowned slightly, as if weighing his sincerity, then leaned back in her chair. You talk like a man who lost more than just money." He exhaled slowly. "I lost myself. Or maybe I traded myself away. Either way, I'm trying to remember who I was before I thought my name mattered more than people." Claire studied him for a moment before nodding. "Well, Dawsonville doesn't care who you used to be. It cares who you are when the roof leaks." Michael chuckled softly, repeating her earlier words. "That's starting to sound like scripture." She smirked faintly. "Maybe it should be." Ethan returned with his workbook, plopping it down in front of Michael. "Can you help me spell something hard?" Michael raised his brows. "All right, give me your toughest." Ethan grinned mischievously. "Spell serendipity." Michael laughed, shaking his head. "That's not second grade." Ethan giggled. "I like big words." Michael spelled it out carefully, and Ethan beamed as though he had just witnessed magic. Claire laughed quietly, the sound soft but genuine, and for a moment Michael felt a weight lift from his shoulders. Later that night, after dishes were washed and Ethan tucked into bed, Michael stood with Claire on the small balcony overlooking the quiet street. The air was warm, filled with the sound of cicadas, the kind of night that stretched long and unhurried. Claire leaned on the railing, arms crossed. "You know, I still don't know who you really are," she said without accusation, only curiosity. Michael hesitated, then answered honestly. "I used to think my name was everything. That if people said it enough times, I mattered more. But now I'm starting to think the only thing that matters is what you do when no one's saying your name at all." Claire looked at him thoughtfully, then nodded. "That's not a bad answer." He reached into his pocket, pulling out a small envelope he had prepared. "I left this on your kitchen counter. It's not much. Just something for Ethan's school stuff, books, lunches, whatever he needs." She looked at it, but didn't take it right away. "I don't want your guilt money." Michael shook his head. "It's not guilt. It's thanks. For him reminding me what being human looks like." She studied him for a long moment before finally accepting it. "You don't need to fix us, Michael. You just need to be honest." He nodded quietly. Inside, Ethan was humming to himself, sorting crayons into a worn shoebox. "Mom, can I give Michael something?" he called. Claire stepped back inside, curious. "What do you want to give him, baby?" Ethan pulled out a small stone wrapped in tissue, handing it shyly to Michael. "I made it in art class. You can keep it in your pocket so you remember to help even when you're sad." Michael unwrapped it carefully. The stone was painted purple with crooked stars, and the words "Be the Helper" scrawled across in uneven letters. His chest tightened as he closed his hand around it. "I'll carry it everywhere," he said softly. Some looked curious, others skeptical, still remembering the viral video that had spread like wildfire. Michael kept his gaze steady, ordered a plain black coffee, and settled into a corner seat with a view of the street. He found comfort in the window, in watching people pass without recognizing the man he used to be, but peace was short-lived. Dolly herself, an older woman with silver hair pulled back in a bun, set down his cup and murmured, "Don't let them bother you, honey. Folks forget faster than they forgive, but kindness lingers longer than either." Michael thanked her, surprised by her frankness, and sat for a long while nursing the bitter coffee until the door opened again. Ethan burst in, his backpack slipping from one shoulder, and behind him came Claire, still in her scrubs, her expression lined with exhaustion. Ethan spotted Michael and ran over. "Mom said I can show you my project. Can you help me after school?" Claire gave Michael a careful look, but didn't stop her son. Michael smiled faintly. "I'd be glad to." That afternoon he followed them back to the apartment, the stone tucked securely in his pocket, its weight both grounding and humbling. Ethan spread his science project across the table, construction paper, glue, and half-bent straws spilling out like chaos. "We're building a rocket," Ethan announced proudly, "and it has to stand up on its own." Michael crouched beside him, examining the pieces. "Sounds like a challenge." "We can do it," Ethan replied confidently, already taping straws into a rough shape. Claire leaned against the counter, arms crossed, watching as Michael patiently guided her son, offering suggestions without taking over, letting Ethan struggle and succeed in his own rhythm. For years, Michael had been surrounded by boardrooms where every problem was solved with numbers, deadlines, and strategies. Here, the problems were crooked straws and stubborn glue, and yet they felt more real than anything he had done in the past decade. When the rocket finally stood upright, albeit wobbly, Ethan whooped in triumph, throwing his arms around Michael without hesitation. Claire smiled despite herself. "You've made his whole week." Michael shook his head softly. "He made mine." As the evening stretched on, Claire warmed leftover spaghetti while Michael and Ethan debated whether the rocket could survive re-entry. They ate together at the small round table, mismatched chairs creaking under their weight, laughter filling the room in place of silence. Michael found himself opening up in ways he had not intended, sharing fragments of his past without names or numbers, admitting that he had once spent years building things that did not last because they were never meant to matter. Claire listened quietly, not prying, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of understanding. After dinner, Ethan dragged Michael into a game of cards, rules half invented, victories declared with dramatic flair. Michael played along, letting himself lose more often than win, though Ethan's grin suggested he knew the truth. When bedtime came, Ethan protested, but Claire ushered him into his room with practiced patience. Michael lingered in the living room, sipping a glass of water, while Claire joined him on the couch. For a while they sat in silence, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound. Then Claire said softly, "I don't know why you're here or why you stayed, but I do know this. My son hasn't laughed this much in a long time, and for that I'm grateful." Michael nodded, his throat tightening. "I didn't think I'd laugh this much again either." She studied him, then said, "Ethan sees you as a friend, not a stranger. Just don't make him regret that." Michael met her gaze steadily. "I won't." In the days that followed, Michael found himself woven deeper into their routine. He drove Claire to the hospital for her night shifts, refusing to let her walk alone through dim streets. He picked Ethan up from school, listening as the boy recounted every small triumph and tragedy with animated detail. Together they cooked dinners, shared root beer, and filled evenings with homework and stories. Word spread through town, and though whispers still lingered about the billionaire caught in humiliation, others began to see a different picture. The cashier from the grocery store offered a hesitant smile one morning, a neighbor waved without suspicion, and Dolly slipped Michael an extra pastry with his coffee, murmuring, "You're finding your place, I see." Yet not all looks were kind. Some people stared longer, whispered sharper, waiting for him to stumble again. Michael ignored them, focusing instead on the small rituals that made life feel real. One night, as Claire prepared to leave for work, Ethan tugged Michael's sleeve. "Can you stay with me tonight? Just until I fall asleep." Michael hesitated, then nodded. He sat at the edge of Ethan's bed as the boy clutched a battered stuffed bear, the purple stone resting on the nightstand beside him. "Do you really carry it every day?" Ethan asked sleepily. Michael pulled it from his pocket, placing it in Ethan's small hand. Every day. He had tried to ignore social media, tried to stay away from the news cycle that once consumed his every breath, but the temptation pulled his eyes toward the screen. His heart sank instantly. Headlines bloomed across the internet. The billionaire in hiding, checkout fraud or redemption arc, and worst of all, small-town savior or PR stunt. His humiliation had not vanished. It had metastasized. Commentators on YouTube, bloggers desperate for views, and even a late-night comedian had seized on his decline. The viral video of his declined card had been edited 100 different ways, set to circus music, framed with fake GoFundMe campaigns, even turned into GIFs that looped endlessly. What had once been mockery by strangers in a store was now ridicule amplified to millions, a narrative stripped of truth and padded with invention. Michael gritted his teeth, shoving the phone face down on the table, but the noise kept buzzing in his head. He left cash on the counter and stepped outside, the Georgia sun already punishing in its heat. As he reached his truck, he heard the one sound that could still pierce the armor of shame, Ethan's bright voice calling across the street. The boy trotted toward him, waving an oversized book, his grin fierce with loyalty. "Mr. Michael, you left your pen at our house last night," he said proudly. Claire followed at a slower pace, her gaze heavy, knowing. Michael knelt to meet Ethan's eyes, forcing a smile. "Thanks, kiddo. You saved me again." Ethan tilted his head. "You look sad." Michael sighed. "I just found out I'm more famous than I want to be." Ethan wrinkled his nose. "That's dumb. You didn't do anything wrong." People laugh because they don't know what else to do. His words echoed the same fearless logic that had guided Michael since the day at the register, but Michael's chest still tightened. Claire reached them, her voice low. "It's everywhere now. Even here. People are talking." Michael nodded grimly. "I figured." The next hours confirmed her warning. At the gas station, an old man filling his tank chuckled and shouted, "Hey, card working today?" Two younger men at the hardware store pointed and mimed swiping a card before bursting into laughter. At Dolly's, the usual warmth in the coffee shop dimmed, patrons whispering behind their cups, their curiosity sharper now that rumor had sharpened their knives. By noon, Michael felt the full weight of exposure pressing down. He could leave, disappear again as he had before, vanish into another small town that didn't know his face. But every time the thought crept in, Ethan's voice pushed back, the boy's certainty reminding him of something deeper than his own pride. He chose instead to drive to the community center, unloading tools and supplies he had purchased. If the world insisted on turning him into a caricature, he would answer with work that left no room for doubt. He dug into weeds, hammered boards, patched swings, all under the glare of a sun that seemed intent on punishing him. By late afternoon, his shirt was soaked, his hands blistered anew, but with every stroke of paint and every tightened bolt, the humiliation loosened its hold, replaced by the steady rhythm of effort. He wasn't building for headlines, he wasn't building for forgiveness. He was building for the children who would climb those monkey bars, for Ethan, who believed hiccups passed, for Claire, who had begun to trust him. When evening came, he drove back to their apartment, a bag of peach cobbler and banana pudding balanced on the passenger seat. Ethan answered the door with a squeal, dragging him inside. They ate together, the laughter at the table lighter than any room Michael had known in years. After dinner, while Ethan brushed his teeth, Michael stepped onto the balcony with Claire, both holding cups of tea. She studied him quietly. "The more famous you get online, the harder this gets." Michael's voice was quiet but steady. "Then I'll outlast it. I used to think the story mattered. Now I know only the truth does." She tilted her head, skeptical but touched. "You believe that?" He nodded, holding up the purple stone. She moved with the sharp confidence of someone who made her living observing what others missed, her notebook tucked under one arm. She scanned the room quickly, and when her eyes landed on Michael, they narrowed not in malice, but in recognition. She walked straight toward him. "Mr. Grant?" she asked. Michael stiffened. He hadn't heard his last name spoken aloud in months, maybe years. "Depends on who's asking." The woman slid into the chair across from him, without waiting for an invitation. "Abigail Tran. I'm a journalist. Independent. I tell human stories. I think yours is one of them." Michael took a slow sip of his coffee, his expression flat. "There's nothing to write." Abigail smiled slightly. "That's where we disagree. The billionaire who vanished, then reappears in a Georgia town where he's humiliated at checkout and starts fixing playgrounds with his own hands? That's not just a story. That's a narrative." Michael's jaw tightened. "I didn't authorize a narrative." "You can't control stories once they leave your hands," she replied. "You should know that better than anyone." Dolly, pretending to wipe the same mug she'd been polishing for 10 minutes, was obviously eavesdropping, her curiosity barely hidden. Michael leaned forward, his voice low. "I'm not interested in publicity. I don't need a redemption arc written by someone who doesn't know me." Abigail matched his intensity, her eyes unwavering. "I'm not here to save your image. I'm here to understand your truth. Why now? Why disappear for 3 years, then come back without the empire, without the suits, without the money, at least not where it counts?" Michael set down his cup, his voice calm but clipped. "I came here to find something I lost. That's all. And I didn't ask anyone to film me or mock me or write about me." Abigail nodded, unfazed. "True. But when you walked into that grocery store with tailored boots and an expired debit card, you walked into a mirror. People saw themselves in you, broken, trying to look fine, and they laughed because it was easier than crying. Michael didn't flinch outwardly, but her words dug at him like nails. He thought of Ethan, the boy's fierce loyalty, the purple stone, and how different his reality had become from the caricature painted online. Abigail softened her tone. "I met a little boy named Ethan. He told his teacher you're his friend, that you're fixing his park. He said you carry a purple rock in your pocket to remind you to be good." Michael's eyes narrowed sharply. "You spoke to him?" "I'm thorough," she said simply. "He said you're the kind of friend who shows up." Michael stayed silent, gripping the stone in his pocket until its edges pressed into his palm. Abigail leaned back. "Let me tell the story your way. No angles, no headlines, just the truth." Michael stared down at his coffee, the silence stretching until she finally slid a business card across the table. On the back, in her handwriting, were the words, "The ones who fall quietly are the ones we need to hear most." She stood and left without another word. Michael sat for a long time, his fingers brushing the card, the weight of her intrusion heavy in his chest. That evening, he found himself at the cemetery on the hill overlooking the town. The gravel crunched under his boots as he walked among headstones, names of strangers etched into stone. He stopped near a plot of children's graves, teddy bears and angels carved into marble, and sat on a bench beneath an old elm tree. For the first time in months, he let his mind drift back to boardrooms filled with hollow applause, to markets that turned on whispers, to the betrayal of a partner who had gutted his trust, back to the headlines that burned his name without asking for facts. The silence after the crash had been suffocating, but the silence now, broken only by the cicadas and the rustle of leaves, was different. It held space instead of crushing it. He pulled the purple stone from his pocket, rolling it between his fingers, grounding himself in its imperfect surface. A voice broke the quiet. "My grandma's buried here." Michael turned to see Eli, the boy he'd met at the playground, standing with a flashlight in hand. "She used to sit on that bench too." Michael nodded. "It's a good bench." Eli tilted his head. "You okay?" Michael studied the boy's raw honesty and answered truthfully, "Yeah, just thinking." Eli nodded like he understood more than his age should allow. "My grandma used to say thinking too much makes you sad if you're not careful. She said jam tastes like hugs, too." Michael chuckled softly. "She sounds wise." They sat together in the dim light, two figures bound not by age or status, but by honesty. He ran his hand over the smooth new bench he and volunteers had built, solid and honest, something he hoped would endure longer than headlines. As he stood there, he allowed himself a breath of anticipation, though part of him braced for whatever judgment might come. By 8 o'clock, families began to trickle in. Mothers with toddlers and strollers, fathers in ball caps, teenagers with restless energy, and seniors leaning on canes, all curious to see what had been done. Ethan, wearing his favorite powder blue backpack, was the first child to dart onto the monkey bars, his laughter cutting across the yard with unfiltered joy. Claire followed more slowly, her thermos in hand, exhaustion still etched on her features, but her eyes bright with pride. She gave Michael a nod across the yard, a silent acknowledgement that he had kept his word. More people came. The cashier from Dawsonville Grocery approached awkwardly, handing Michael a loaf of banana bread with a sheepish smile, as if to say that past judgments were softened now. Michael accepted it graciously. He had learned not to measure trust in grand gestures, but in small offerings like this. At 9, Abigail Tran arrived, dressed not in her sharp blazer, but in sneakers and jeans, her hair tied back. She carried her notebook, but held it loosely, scribbling only occasionally, preferring to observe with her own eyes. "You really did it," she said, standing beside him. Michael handed her a sandwich. "I said I would, but this isn't mine alone. It belongs to them." Abigail nodded and pointed toward the tree line. Michael followed her gaze and froze. At the edge of the park stood a man in a dark suit, sunglasses hiding his eyes, posture stiff and commanding. He did not move closer, did not call out, only watched. Michael's chest tightened. "Who is he?" Abigail asked. "Someone from the past," Michael muttered. The man lingered for a few minutes, then turned and left without a word. Michael forced himself to shake off the unease and returned his focus to the children laughing on the new slide painted fire engine red. Ethan waved him over, shouting, "Mr. Michael, you have to test it. It's your slide now." Michael chuckled. "I'm not sure I meet the weight limit." The crowd laughed lightly, even Claire cracked a smile, and Michael relented. He climbed the ladder and slid down, landing with a whoop that surprised even him. Applause, half teasing and half genuine, rippled through the crowd. "Look safe," someone called. The moment was small, but it stitched him closer to the town. As the morning unfolded, more families arrived. Kids raced in circles, grandparents sipped lemonade under the trees, and the mural painted by local teens shimmered in bold colors across the community building's wall. It read, "Be the Helper," with a purple stone painted beneath the words. Michael stared at it for a long time, unsure who had added the stone, but knowing instantly what it meant. Abigail joined him. "You've started something," she said. Michael shook his head. "I didn't start it. Ethan did." Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion at the gate. Two teenage boys were shoving each other, voices raised, fists clenched. Michael jogged over. One boy, lanky and red-faced, shouted, "He tagged me on purpose." The other shot back, "You pushed me first." Michael stepped between them. "That's enough." Both boys glared, chest heaving. Michael looked at the angrier one. "What's your name?" "Jason," the boy muttered. Michael pointed at the mural. "See that stone? A little boy gave me the real one, because I needed help and no one else would. Now I carry it, so I don't forget that being strong isn't about hitting first. It's about knowing when to stop." Jason looked away, shame flickering across his face. "Shake hands," Michael instructed. Reluctantly, the boys obeyed. "Now grab a juice box and cool off." The tension eased, and laughter returned to the yard. Abigail scribbled quickly in her notebook. Michael noticed and smirked. "What are you writing now?" "Truth," she answered simply. By afternoon, the sandwiches were gone. Popsicles had melted sticky trails down small hands, and the lemonade coolers were empty. Families lingered, reluctant to leave, the air filled with the sound of children shrieking in delight. Ethan wrapped his arms around Michael's waist, whispering, "Best park ever." Claire approached with a tired smile. "You okay?" she asked softly. Michael nodded. "Better than I've been in years." But her expression tightened slightly. "You sure that man in the suit didn't spook you?" Michael forced a calm tone. "The past doesn't get to own me anymore." She studied him, skeptical but willing to let it rest. As dusk fell and the crowd thinned, Michael sat on the new bench, watching the mural glow in the moonlight. He pulled the purple stone from his pocket, rolling it between his fingers. Michael froze, the sound of his old name pulling him backward into memories he had spent years burying. "Jackson Greer," he muttered. The man smiled faintly. "Glad you remember me." Michael did not return the smile. Hard to forget the man who handed me my exit papers. Jackson held out a business card, but Michael refused to take it. "I'm not here to rehash the past," Jackson said smoothly. "I'm here with an opportunity." Michael shifted to step around him, but Jackson followed. "You disappeared. No press, no explanation. You walked away from a company you built with your own hands. You left billions on the table. Everyone thought you lost your mind." Michael's voice was calm but edged with steel. "I didn't lose my mind. I gained peace." Jackson's facade cracked slightly. "You could have cleared your name, Michael. You still can. You could come back. Reclaim everything. Control the narrative again." Michael shook his head slowly. "I don't need the world's apology. I needed to stop pretending it mattered." Jackson's jaw tightened, his voice lowering. "It does matter. You're trending again. The grocery store, humiliation. The kid, the playground. People are watching. You could use this. Spin it. Rebrand yourself. Make a comeback." Michael turned to face him fully, meeting his eyes. "I'm not a product, Jackson. Not a brand. Not your golden goose." Jackson stepped closer, his tone sharpening. "You're wasting yourself here. Fixing swings. Sharing lemonade with school kids. You were a leader. You changed industries. You built empires." Michael's voice cracked but held firm. I also crushed people under impossible deadlines and ignored my mother's last voicemail because I was closing a deal. That's what your empire cost me." The words hit Jackson hard, his jaw flexing. Michael continued, "This town doesn't want another tech king. They want someone who listens when the roof leaks. Someone who shows up when the lights go out. I'm not coming back." Jackson looked around the sleepy street as if it offended him. "You think this is your redemption story?" he scoffed. "This place is a dead end." Michael's voice was calm, resolute. "No, it's a new beginning." Jackson shoved the card into Michael's pocket anyway, his voice dropping to a growl. "The door's open. You won't like it when it closes." He turned and walked back to the car, leaving Michael rooted to the sidewalk with the card burning against his chest like a curse. That evening at Claire's apartment, Michael sat at the dinner table while Ethan showed off a stick-figure drawing of him planting flowers, complete with a speech bubble that said, "Let's build hope." Claire teased gently, "You've turned into a cartoon." Michael chuckled. Could have been worse. He could have drawn me as a goat again. Ethan giggled. Goats are funny. The laughter faded when Michael glanced at the window, his mind buzzing with Jackson's words. Claire noticed his quiet. "What's really on your mind?" she asked. Michael sighed. "A man from my past showed up today. He wants me to come back, reclaim everything I walked away from." Claire's gaze sharpened. "Do you want that?" Michael stared at the purple stone in his palm. "I don't know. I thought I left for good reasons, but now it feels like the past is trying to pull me back. Maybe I haven't changed as much as I think." Claire's voice was steady, unwavering. "You have." The Michael who showed up broke and embarrassed at a grocery store didn't run. He stayed. And the one sitting here eating spaghetti with a single mom and her loudmouth kid isn't the man in those headlines. Ethan chimed in through a mouthful of food. "You can't fix stuff if you're always flying in jets." Michael chuckled despite the tension. "Is that in the Bible?" "No," Ethan said proudly. "It's in my brain." After dinner, when Ethan was asleep, Michael stood at the window, staring out into the dark. He pulled the business card from his pocket, its embossed letters glaring like chains. For a moment he hesitated, the echo of boardrooms and applause tugging at him. Then he held it over the flame of a candle Claire had left burning on the counter. The edges curled slowly, then the whole thing caught fire. Michael dropped it into the sink and watched until it was nothing but ash. His chest tightened, but then loosened. Michael Grant thought the burning of Jackson Greer's business card would bring finality, but it was only the beginning of a storm that tested everything he had built in Dawsonville. A few days later, the town woke to an edited video spreading across the internet. Grainy security footage cropped to suggest that Michael himself had been the one to deface the Be the Helper mural weeks earlier. The caption read, "The truth about Dawsonville's savior caught in the act." It spread with brutal speed, shared thousands of times before sunrise. For outsiders who already saw him as a fallen billionaire play-acting redemption, it was proof of hypocrisy. For locals, it was a dagger of doubt. Michael watched the video in silence at Dolly's, his coffee untouched, his stomach clenched. Dolly whispered from behind the counter, "I know it isn't true, but folks are asking questions." He nodded grimly. By noon, a crowd formed outside the community center. They were not shouting, not rioting, but their folded arms and narrowed eyes cut deeper than any words. Michael stepped forward, his voice firm but heavy. "I've seen the video, and I promise you it's not me. It's been tampered with. I left a world that doesn't forgive, and they're trying to make sure I never belong anywhere again." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, skepticism thick. Claire stepped beside him, her voice unwavering. "He was with me and my son that night. He helped Ethan with his homework. He didn't touch that wall." Abigail pushed forward too, waving her notebook. "I checked the metadata on the footage. It was altered. Someone wants to frame him because his story threatens the narrative that power can't change." For a moment, silence hung like a guillotine, until old Mr. Jenkins, a retired construction worker, spoke from the back. "I don't know much about tech tricks, but I know that boy." He pointed at Ethan, standing small but fierce at Michael's side. "That boy wouldn't follow a liar, and I trust his judgment more than any video." Chuckles broke out. tension loosening. Ethan beamed, clutching Michael's hand. The crowd slowly dispersed, not fully convinced, but softened, their trust shaken yet not broken. That night, Michael sat on the porch of the community center, exhaustion pressing into his bones. Claire joined him, offering tea. "Do you think this will stop?" He shook his head. "No, but maybe it doesn't need to. Maybe the truth doesn't need to shout. Maybe it just needs to survive long enough to matter." She studied him, her eyes soft but steady. "You're stronger now, stronger than the noise." The next morning, volunteers gathered again at the library wing, determined to keep building. Children carried paintbrushes, seniors dusted shelves, and teens repainted the mural brighter than before, adding flowers, stars, and small handprints around the stone. Above, they painted new words: "Truth always outlives the noise." Michael stood back, paint splattered on his jeans, the purple stone warm in his pocket, his chest tight with gratitude. Later that week, the town dedicated the reopened library wing as the Helper's Corner. Folding chairs filled the courtyard. Townsfolk gathered with quiet reverence, and Mayor Walden spoke. "We dedicate this space not to one man, but to a truth that kindness, not rumors, builds legacies." He turned to Michael. "But we thank the one who reminded us." Michael swallowed hard, stepping forward. He spoke softly but firmly. "I came here not expecting a monument. I came because a little boy offered me $10 when my card failed. That moment fed more than my hunger. It fed my soul. I spent years chasing headlines, applause, bottom lines. None of that changed me. This did. Helping matters. Staying matters. Truth matters. And no video, no noise can take that away." Applause rose, gentle but lasting. Ethan ran to hug him tightly, whispering, "I helped build." Michael knelt, smiling through glassy eyes. "No, kiddo. You helped me build." That evening, as families lingered, sharing casseroles and lemonade under string lights, Michael sat on the bench beneath the mural, rolling the stone in his fingers. Abigail joined him, her notebook closed. "This is a story," she said quietly. Michael shook his head. "No, this is the life. Stories fade. Lives change things." She smiled, leaving him in peace. Claire sat beside him then, Ethan asleep against her shoulder, and together they watched fireflies spark against the dusk. Michael looked at the boy, at the woman beside him, at the town around him, and felt something he had never felt in boardrooms or headlines: belonging. He whispered to the night, "Legacy isn't what they write about you. It's what you build with your hands, your heart, and your time." He tucked the stone back into his pocket, its edges worn smooth now, a promise carried everywhere. The cicadas sang, the mural glowed in the lantern light, and Dawsonville breathed around him, imperfect, stubborn, but alive. For the first time, Michael knew he was home. The end. If this story kept you reading until the very end, take a second to like this video and subscribe so you never miss the next one. I'd love to hear what you think about Michael's journey. Did the ending surprise you, or did you see it coming? Share your thoughts in the comments, and let me know where in the world you're watching from, because it's always incredible to see how far these stories travel.